2018. I remind my colleagues to please silence all electronic devices at this time. I'd like to remind the board of our scheduled visit this Thursday at 3:30 for the Thurgood Elementary Learning Village. I know we originally announced that it would be on Wednesday, but there was a scheduling conflict, so we have rescheduled it for Thursday afternoon between 3:30 and 5:30.
So do we all show up at 3:30, or is it between that time to show up?
I'm not sure, Miss.
You all show up at 3:30.
I'll show up at 3:30, okay. And we will not have a closed session this evening. It has been postponed. Mrs. Manning will not be here this evening due to a family matter. And is there anyone else that has anything to share with the board at this time under admin matters? Ms. Melnick.
I will. I wanted to thank Dr. Spence for the welcome back video. It was awesome, and I wanted to thank you for recognizing the hard work of all of our employees and our students and the community, and for our viewing public who may not have seen the video. I just wanted to highlight a few of the things that you said in that video. So, VBCPS is projecting a record on-time graduation rate.
Yay.
The class of 2018 was offered a record $104 million in scholarships. We are recognized as a leader in education. For example, we are working with Two Revolutions, an education innovation laboratory, to help think about the future of learning and create a scalable model for school divisions across the country. Because of our work in sustainable practices, we are recognized by VSBA as a green school division. We've been recognized with a Green Cleaning Award, one of only 3 districts in the country to get that award. The EPA continues to recognize us as an Energy Star national partner. We have over this was really impressive. We have over 35,000 volunteers and partners in education who gave over 400,000 hours in community service. We are 1-to-1 across the division with Chromebooks, and yay, we are 100% accredited for the 2nd year in a row. But I also wanted to thank you for recognizing that we still have a lot of work to do. And I have total and complete confidence in you all and our employees and, of course, our students. So thank you. It was really a great video.
I loved
And
it.
how many suits have you ruined with water in the summer?
Enough.
And when you sent it to us, I was coming back from that exact spot. We were riding our bikes down there Saturday morning, and I turned it on. I'm like, oh my God, we were just here.
Mm-hmm.
So all the places,
good.
you know, there you were.
Thank you. It's good stuff. Thank you.
I do have one more announcement that I forgot to mention. We will have a picture taken of the group as we're holding it up to welcome back students, and we're going to post that. But we'll also be sending it to VSBA to show that we did. I don't know if you all got that from VSBA, but so that has been blown up. The thing that VSBA sent us to welcome back our students, and so we'll have our picture between this workshop and the meeting. Okay, right after the workshop's over. Mr. Edwards.
Just wanted to let my colleagues know that the audit folks, the committee and our staff, received a FOIA, and our audits from the previous year that have been posted on SharePoint, and I've alerted you all when they, as we put them up there during the year. They've been FOIA'd, and so if you've not had the opportunity to go online and read them, you might want to, since they may appear in news sometime. And there's some other aspects of that I will cover in a memo to all of you separately. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that has anything to share today? Okay. Dr. Spence, we are ready for our first workshop, our only workshop item
First
today.
First and only tonight.
Every Student Succeeds Act.
We will. So you all know that the No Child Left Behind Act was reauthorized finally as the Every Student Succeeds Act, and so this is really our first time to sit down and talk with you in some detail about what the implications of the reauthorization are and what that looks like for us here in Virginia Beach. So leading that conversation is going to be Tracy Legata, who you all know from our testing office. And so, Tracy, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, good afternoon. Chairwoman Anderson, Vice Chair McDonald, Dr. Spence, School Board, good afternoon, everybody. As you are aware, the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015, otherwise known as ESSA, was signed into law in December 2015. The Virginia Board of Education approved its plan to implement ESSA in July 2017. The final version of the state plan was approved by the U.S. Department of Education this past May. So this afternoon, I'm going to review with you the federal accountability items in this approved state plan as it was outlined by the Virginia Department of Education guidance document shared with divisions just earlier this month. If you recall, I reviewed with you the standards of accreditation revisions as they relate to state accreditation calculations this past February. Once again, schools will be accountable under two very different systems. The state accreditation status of our schools and schools identified for assistance under federal accountability will be determined under two different sets of rules. Just a moment ago, I shared with you, I gave you a Venn diagram comparing these two different systems. I've already shared the changes in state accreditation, which is represented on the left-hand side of the diagram. And today I'm going to spend time talking about the changes to federal accountability. At first glance, I know this diagram won't make much sense. Over the next several minutes, I'll be talking about the items listed in this diagram, and you can choose if you'd like to write questions or jot down any notes, but by the time we finish tonight, I'm going to be reviewing all the items in that diagram as you see it. So, ESSA requires that 95% of students participate in reading and math annually in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school. Although participation in and on the science SOL test is not calculated for federal accountability, it is expected that students will participate in a science SOL test once in elementary school, once in middle school, and once in high school. Reading, mathematics, and science participation rates will be reported on the school quality profiles that VDOE publish online, and schools that do not meet the requirement in reading and or math will be required to develop a plan that includes strategies to improve their participation. When calculating pass rates for federal accountability, achievement on the reading and math SOL test will be reviewed for all students and also disaggregated by reporting groups that we typically measure, such as economically disadvantaged and special education, etc. Federal accountability achievement will be calculated based on passing an SOL test and will not include growth like we see under the updated state accreditation system. Although participation in science is required, performance for science will not be considered when identifying schools for support. However, the pass rates for reading, math, and science will also be included on the school quality profiles. In elementary schools, all grades 3 through 5 reading and math tests will be included in calculating pass rates. In middle school, all grades 6 through 8 and any end of course reading and math tests will be included. High school's pass rate will be determined a little bit differently, so I'm going to explain that. Starting with the fall of 2018, high school students are required to take an SOL test only if they need it for verified credit or to meet the federal accountability requirements under ESSA. For the first time this coming school year, we will have students in end-of-course classes who will not be required to take an end-of-course SOL assessment because they've already earned their verified credit and they've met the ESSA requirements. For example, starting with the fall 2018 ninth grade class, a student who takes Algebra 1 in grade 9 and passes the SOL test has met their verified credit requirement and their ESSA requirement for math. When that student goes to grade 10 and takes geometry, the student will not take the geometry SOL test, as was required in the past by the standards of accreditation. This means that high schools will have fewer scores from our higher level courses included in state accreditation combined rates and in federal accountability pass rates. Another consideration, upcoming ninth grade students who have earned their one required math and or science verified credit for graduation in middle school will still have to take a math and or science SOL test in high school for the purposes of federal accountability. These students will be in a geometry and or biology class taking an SOL that they do not need for the purpose of a verified credit. Because students in high school are only required to take a math, reading, and science SOL test once in high school under ESSA, the federal pass rates will be based on reading, and of course reading, biology, and primarily Algebra 1 for math. If a student has taken Algebra 1 or geometry in middle school, the next higher level math test that is taken at the high school level will be used for calculating the math pass rate. Similar to state accreditation, there are other indicators for federal accountability. Chronic absenteeism will be calculated at each school, and this calculation is the only indicator that is the same for both federal accountability and state accreditation. English learner progress based on the Access for ELS assessment, that is our required English language proficiency assessment. Those scores will be calculated for all English learners at each school. The Federal Graduation Indicator, or FGI, will be calculated for high schools. The FGI only includes students who graduate with a standard, advanced, or IB diploma in 4 years. As you may recall, state accreditation calculates a Graduation and Completion Index, or GCI, which is a point-based system where all completion types are awarded a certain number of points and then averaged together. I'm going to share with you another handout real quick.
Thank you.
You still have to pass algebra, SOL to graduate.
I think that's your question.
This handout contains tables that show the interim progress targets expected over the next several years for all students in each reporting group. Reporting groups that meet or exceed these interim targets must improve from 1 year to the next year. And as new SOL tests are administered, the benchmarks that you have in front of you will be revised. And that first change is actually going to happen this year after the new math assessments are administered in 2018-19. And then there will be new reading tests administered in 1920. So this document will change as new assessments are administered. And you want to go ahead and take a minute to look at that document.
Would you mind kind of talking us through at least a little bit of this chart? Just
Sure.
starting on the first one, just so how we read it, so we're all reading it the same way.
Absolutely. So BDOE was required to come up with a long-term target. And the first page 79, this document is actually from the ESSA state plan. Year 7 is their long-term target. And you'll notice for reading, it is 75, just like it is for accreditation English. However, they were required by the federal government to come up to calculate baseline data. So they have taken all the assessments that we have given for English, these standards, and have determined for all students, for example, the baseline is 73. It is required that if you've met year one, which is the second column, 73% at a school for all students, even though the baseline or the target for the next year is 73, you have to show improvement from one year to the next. So to meet these interim targets, let's see, year one was the assessments we just gave for the accreditation that we were just talking about tonight. These were the expected targets to meet when they were determining who is in need of supports. If you've met that target, it is expected at minimum you will show growth the following year. And if you've already met the year 7 target, which in a lot of cases our schools have, it is expected you'll show growth from that. And again, these will adjust as we have new assessments, so this document will change.
And whose baselines are these?
The state of Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah, SOL tests that we've taken in the state of Virginia for those subjects.
Is there a way to understand in the economically disadvantaged students the crossover between the other subgroups? Or is that, how is that it affects all of them, but there's a way to know?
When they look at the data, they take all the students that are identified as economically disadvantaged and look at those scores separately. And then for every subgroup, if there's an economically disadvantaged student that's African American and an English learner, those scores are included in those subgroups as
In
well.
both, that's what I mean, they're both subgroups, yeah.
So there's some
I assume
overlapping
that,
there, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
Right.
Yes.
you can't, yeah.
okay. But there's more.
And there's more.
There is one other academic growth indicator. There's another indicator that you don't see here. There's an academic growth indicator. It's different than the others in that it does not have interim targets like you just looked at. Academic growth will, however, be calculated as a separate indicator to identify schools needing support. And academic growth is based on students who pass the test, who show growth on the test, on the SOL test, and students who show growth on their Access for ELS test, similar to what we see in state accreditation, but it is a separate measure. And I would guess that your next question is, so what? What happens when we don't meet these benchmarks? What's next? And that's what I'm going to tell you next. The Virginia ESSA plan identifies 3 different types of supports, and I'm going to review each of them for you. Schools may be identified for comprehensive support and improvement. This support is reserved for Title I schools who do not meet interim measures for their all students group, and also any high school, not just Title I high schools, any high school with an FGI lower than 67%. I'm going to review how the identification process works. In step 1, Title I schools that do not meet the reading and math, and if they're a high school, they don't meet the FGI, and they are in the lowest 2 quartiles of academic growth, they will be identified. We do not have any Title I schools that meet this criteria, and we do not expect that we'll have any schools identified for having this support. However, if we did, my computer just went off. If we did have schools identified under step 1, from those schools, the schools in the lowest 2 quartiles of English learner progress would be identified in step 2. And from those schools, step 3 looks at schools that did not meet the interim benchmark for chronic absenteeism and schools that are not accredited. And at this stage, we know that all of our schools are accredited, so if we had schools up to this point, we wouldn't expect to have any schools identified for this support. As you can see here in the tip of the triangle, any high school, not just Title I schools, with an FGI below 67%, they would be identified for this support. And we do not have any high schools with an FGI at that range. They're well above the 67% mark. Schools will be identified for this support every 3 years, beginning with the 18-19 school year, with this school year. And this means that the next identification for this support won't be until 2021-22. Schools may be identified for targeted support and improvement. This support is reserved for any school not meeting interim benchmarks for their reporting groups and FGI for 2 consecutive years. So this is not just Title I schools, this is all schools not meeting the interim benchmarks for any of their reporting groups or FGI for 2 years in a row. Any school that has reporting groups that did not meet the interim measure of progress in reading and math, and if it's a high school FGI for 2 consecutive years, and they're in the lowest 2 quartiles of academic growth, will be identified in step 1. And since this is the first year of calculating and reporting this data with these rules, schools will not have missed a benchmark for 2 consecutive years yet, and therefore we wouldn't have anyone falling in this category, but let's say hypothetically we do. We'll say we have 5 schools that were identified in step 1, hypothetically. If any of those 5 schools missed the mark as described in step 1, if they were ranked in the lowest 2 quartiles of EL progress, as we see in step 2, they would still be in the running for some support. So let's say 2 of those 5 schools are still identified due to step 2. From those 2 schools, step 3 looks at schools that did not meet the interim benchmark for chronic absenteeism for 2 years in a row and are not accredited. If those 2 schools were accredited, as all of our schools are, they would not be identified for targeted support and improvement. Schools will be identified for this support annually, and that will not begin until the 1920 school year, when they have 2 consecutive years of data. And there's a third. And this may sound a bit confusing, but the third support is called Additional Targeted Support and Improvement. It includes schools identified in Support 2 that also have 1 or more student groups performing below the highest performing school in Support 1. Based on the fact that all of our schools are accredited, we do not expect to have any schools identified for this support either. And just like the first support I showed you, schools will be identified beginning with the 18-19 school year this year and will not be identified again until the 21-22 school years. It's a 3-year cycle. And as promised, I'm bringing you back to the Venn diagram. As I mentioned at the start, schools will be accountable under 2 different systems. On the slide, our left is state accreditation and right is federal accountability, and the center are items that are the same in both systems. I know you have the answers, but I just want to talk through the different pieces briefly, summarize for you. So SOL scores are considered under both systems. State accreditation rates combine passing scores and student growth, while federal accountability only includes passing. And while both systems look at reporting groups like special ed and economically disadvantaged, state accreditation has a set benchmark, 70% for all groups in math and science and 75% for English, and English is reading and writing combined for accreditation. Federal accountability has interim benchmarks for math and reading, but writing and science are not considered in identifying supports. English learner progress is embedded in the state accreditation combined rate, but for federal accountability, this progress is a separate indicator. Academic growth is also embedded in the accreditation combined rate. For federal accountability, growth on SOL tests will be considered separately for determining schools who might be identified to receive support. The College and Career Readiness Indicator is only part of state accreditation. And as a reminder, that will not be measured until the year 2021-22, when the upcoming 9th grade class is in their senior year. Both systems include graduation indicators. The Graduation and Completion Index for accreditation is the point-based system, and the Federal Graduation Indicator is only based on standard, advanced, and IB diplomas. And just to keep in mind that our on-time graduation rate is yet another calculation that is different than the two systems. Both systems include a measure of chronic absenteeism and are calculated the same way.
Whole one thing.
And while schools are identified under accreditation with a status, they're either accredited with conditions, or accreditation denied. That's not the case for federal accountability. Under federal accountability, only those lowest performing schools that have been identified based on the charts that we looked at, they are identified as qualifying for support. All other schools will have no federal designation. On September 27th, VDOE will release the accreditation status of our schools, and will release the names of schools across the state that are going to that are identified as having any of the supports that we talked about, the comprehensive support and the additional targeted support. And at this time, although I think I've shared with you everything I know, I am absolutely open for questions. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Melnick?
Okay, going back to the verified credits.
Yes.
So let's say a student passes Algebra 1 but fails the SOL, then takes geometry but passes the geometry SOL. Does that,
They will have the
That
verified
counts.
credit from geometry.
from geometry? Okay, so no.
They may and probably will be invited to take both, and Algebra 1 is a retake and geometry, so they have every opportunity to pass one, but once they've passed one, it doesn't matter which one.
But it's not mandatory now to pass
That's okay.
the,
They need one passing
One pass,
math. If the 9th grade class starting this year and on.
Okay.
Not our 10th through 12th graders that are currently in school. They're under the old graduation system.
I just missed the last part, I think. So,
The grades 10 through 12 students are under the old system, so they still need however many verified credits for
Okay.
either a standard or advanced
So this
diploma is different.
just the new guys. Okay.
Yes, 9th grade class starts the new number of verified credits.
I have a question, and I'm sort of jumping, but he doesn't have my name here, so. Do they still need algebra to graduate? And passing algebra SOL to graduate?
Students starting 9th grade this fall need to pass classes, and I can't swear to you the number, I don't know, but they only need to pass one SOL test for a verified credit. I know it's more than one math class, I can't remember.
So, in other words, what Ms. Melnick said, if they fail the SOL for algebra, but they pass the one for geometry, then they're
They
okay.
have their SOL test for their
Okay.
verified credit, as long as they
Starting
pass the class.
Starting with 9th grade, okay. Mr. McDonald?
Thank you. Well, I'm certain glad they kept it simple.
Yes, this was rocket science.
So hopefully we never have a federal designation. And I'm hoping that my question relates to a problem that we probably will end up happening is what if a subgroup exceeding a target doesn't improve from year to year? Or we just max out 7 years down the road to where we are. So let's say we've got a school where we've got 95% of a subgroup passing tests and the next year it's 93, but we're only looking at a goal of 70.
Those schools won't be in the bottom percent of they'll have to make it through that whole chart.
So it doesn't
they'll
matter
never
unless the
be in
whole
that
school
lowest
is really struggling.
quartile, yeah.
Okay.
I
Just
thought
wanted to
through
make
that
sure.
same question. A school that
I figured
has
that was
high
probably
pass
the
rates.
case, yeah.
Mhm.
Mr. Edwards?
The lack of alignment between the feds and Richmond is sort of obvious, and I assume that they're aware of that in Richmond. And this may be a Dr. Spence rather than your question, but to the extent that they're aware, is that something they're proud of or concerned about?
Well, I'd like to say, if
Well,
you
I
don't
mean-
mind, they started with a plan that was aligned. They did. Their first iteration of the state plan was much more aligned than it is right now. And there was back and forth conversation, and unfortunately, based on the federal government's feedback, this is what they have.
But there's variables on both sides that can be, I mean, that's, you know, I mean, alignment is
So
possible
confusing.
even if the feds don't give on anything. So, like, assume they're aware of that.
They're certainly aware. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, they had to submit the plan
I mean, they're-
3 times, I think, before it was
It's
approved.
on the front of your document, actually. The number of
yeah, I saw
divisions,
it, yeah. And it-
are on the front page.
well, I've got a bunch of other questions, but a lot of it's asking for some data, which can be done offline. But, thank
Except I
you.
don't have a pen. Can I borrow? Thank you. I
Ms.
had
Mc-
3 pens when I started.
Ms. McLeod?
Thank you. My questions kind of stem from where Mrs. Melnick did as well. You answered in the presentation that if they took the Algebra 1 SOL in 8th grade, they still have to take it because they just have to simply be in a high school building and have to take it for that.
Yes, they have
And
to.
I'm just curious, do you know the rationale why they decided not to include it? Why couldn't, if they're taking a high school class, for heaven's sakes, why wouldn't they allow that SOL? And then my other question is,
The SOL is part of this federal ESSA calculation. If they've already have their verified credit though, they don't need a second verified credit.
but it said in the presentation that if they take it in 8th grade, it cannot count
Oh.
as their verified
Why
credit.
can't they? Because,
That's my
yeah,
point, is
the
what,
federal government mandates that they take one math, science, and reading test in high school, and 8th grade is not high school.
Oh.
According to the federal government, I
So-
didn't make the
do, what other math courses, because they don't have to take geometry.
their next highest level
Next.
math, so geometry or algebra 2, whatever they take next,
Okay.
they would need to take an SOL.
So the student passes Algebra 1 and then goes through geometry all the next year and hopefully is doing well in it. But half of the class passed the SOL in Algebra 1, and so only half of the class has to take so
That
what
is
does that do?
possible.
Yeah. So what does that do? What is the half the class gets to go to Bayville Park and have a good picnic while everybody else is in taking the SOL? Or they sit in Princess Anne High School gymnasium waiting for them all to get that done. Is that pretty much accurate?
Well, this is a brand new system that starts with the incoming
Sure.
freshman class, so I
Right.
wouldn't say that that's accurate yet. I think that's something we're going
That's
to
how
have
it
to work
has
through.
rolled, yeah.
This was a long conversation between our state association and the state when they
Right.
were getting feedback on this, and we have some fairly deep concerns about the degree to which because they'll still have to sit for the test. They have to sit for one math test while they're
Right.
in, even if they already have a verified credit. And so, our concern is really more about like the degree of seriousness with which they'll take that test if it doesn't have any meaning to it, and what that's going to do to our scores. And then you'll end up in some of those classes, those upper level classes, where, like you said, there'll be some students who will have to take those tests, and then a whole group of students who don't have to take those tests, and then we'll have to figure out, so do they come to school on those days, or do they not come to school on those days? And then, typically the students who are passing those math tests earlier, algebra, geometry, by 8th or 9th grade, are your accelerated math students, and so the students who are left taking those classes are also not going to be your accelerated math students. So that's going to be part
I
of our
forgot
concern
about
too.
that. Both of my kids took algebra and geometry, and so
They would take algebra 2 in high school as
Yeah.
well.
so it's just
Then
forcing
whatever's
them to
next.
continue to take math.
Well, I think they have to take the class anyway. How many?
Yeah, you still have to get, for the standard diploma, it's 3 standard credits in math anyway. So you still have to get the credit, it's just not
For the
verified
class.
by the test.
Are we hurting the kids by forcing them into taking math too early?
Hurting them how?
Some of the kids that don't want to go to college, they don't need to take calculus. But they went ahead because they were kind of on that track, but they've decided now they don't really want to go that track. as in high school, so I'm just, but so now they can't count those credits they're taking in middle school for their high school standard diploma. I hadn't really thought of this.
No, the credits count.
They count.
Yeah, the credits count, but not for a verified credit to be able.
To graduate.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Am I off here? But you get I know I'm going down a whole different rabbit hole. Totally get that.
Yeah.
But it's making me think differently about some of the things we're doing. So you've answered my question well enough. I just don't understand why they wouldn't if they took the SOL. Oh, maybe in 8th grade, if they're taking Algebra 1, do they have to take the SOL?
Yes, for their verified credit, which will count towards their diploma.
Yeah, so I
In
think
eighth
there's
grade?
so I think that's where there's some confusion. So
Yeah.
if we have a student in the 8th grade who takes algebra and then they take the SOL and they pass the SOL test, they have a verified credit now in math when they get to high school. The ESSA requirement is simply that they must take a math test in high school. So even though they would already have let's use the example of the 8th grader in Algebra 1, takes the Algebra 1 SOL, now has that high school credit plus a verified credit, and they would normally sit in geometry in 9th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they're sitting in geometry. ESSA requires this is about participation, that participation rate. From a participation rate standpoint, that child also sit for the geometry test, even though they don't need it for a
Right.
verified credit.
Which is to your point, you're curious.
Well, I'm a little concerned about how seriously they'll
Okay.
take it.
Thank you.
And then beyond that, let's
So
say
we'll
then
get
that
to-
group
yeah.
of students has sat for that,
Right.
and now they're into their Algebra 2
So
class.
You guys have all had the chance to
The
think
only
about
ones
these
left
credits.
taking the Algebra
We're
2
just
test
starting.
at that point are
Right.
the ones who have not earned a verified credit to that point,
Right.
which means those are the students who are likely struggling the most with mathematics. And so
Yeah.
I think you're going to
That's
see
nice.
some interesting
Yeah.
things
Better
happen with our
education.
pass rates as a result of this.
Substancing.
And we've been having this conversation at the state level for several years now in giving feedback on the ESSA plan that the state was working on. And the answer is that's the way that's the way we're going to do it. That was particular. Actually, our comment was less about the ESSA participation requirement and more about lowering the number of verified credits, because we felt lowering the number of verified credits was going to create this problem that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But there's no,
Ms.
so
Melnick, it's your-
continuing with your question though, so a kid gets to 8th grade, they
Don't.
max out at geometry, they're done with math, but they have to take a math, so they take that capstone math class, which is just that refresher. There's no SOL for that, correct?
Correct.
So they have to go on. Kicking
love
and
it.
screaming, I
Yeah.
guess. Okay.
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 Mrs. Rye.
I was just gonna ask, so the word support showed up in the screen, so what are we talking about when we say comprehensive support, targeted support? What is the nature of the support? Is it support they're requiring as opposed to providing?
It's a little bit of both.
What's the mandate?
So we've had schools in federal support before. What were they called? Targeted
Priority.
priority. Thank you. Sorry, I should have that. Priority schools. And there's different layers. So a lot of that support comes through the state. So it's not provided by the federal government. It's provided at the state level, and we work with their Office of Continuous Improvement. There'll be coaches who'll come into the building, and they'll work with the leadership team. And then it depends on what the level is, and then there'll be requirements on the teachers for different things based on the plan that's written.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments? Ms. Riggs?
Just a question. Do you like this better? Is this ESSA
So what we
ESSA better than No Child Left Behind?
It's the same thing.
it's ESSA. I mean, the impact of ESSA for us is not as important as the plan that the state had to submit in order to be in order to continue receiving federal funds under ESSA.
Okay.
And so that plan is what changed accountability for the state of Virginia, and that's what was being discussed. What we do like about it is that the growth is now embedded in the model.
Okay, got
That's a big deal. That's a big deal because it's taking into account that a student who comes into a third grade classroom for the first time testing and is reading on a first grade level, if they're able to be reading on a second grade level by the end of the year, and that can be demonstrated in terms of their performance on the SOL, then by the time that student's a fourth or fifth grade student, we'll see that growth in their testing profile, and then we'll get credit for that student's work, because we're bringing them further along, even if they're not at grade level. So we like that. We've been having lots of conversation about how they look at growth. They've used what they call progress tables, which I don't think is a very robust measure of growth, but that's what we have right now. I want to bring up one other thing that's not in this presentation, but it's germane to some recent conversations. There are also, in addition to these accountability requirements under ESSA, there are a whole new set of financial reporting requirements under ESSA that essentially take us from reporting district spending at the district level to district spending at the school level, which has not been a requirement before. It's not how our chart of accounts are set up. You've actually had some interesting questions about that recently from some of our community members.
Yes.
We just haven't been set up to do it that way. Per pupil spending's never been reported at the school level. So we are right now in the middle of, and really it's Farrell and his team leading the work, preparing to start reporting at a school level. And so that data will start to become available. It's not next year, right, Farrell? Or not at the end of this school year, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it'll be at the end of this school year that we'll start being able to make per school spending data available, and we'll be required to, and it'll be reported to the state and be reported publicly.
Dr. Smith, I'm sorry. Is that just per pupil, or will it go beyond that?
It's beyond that. But there's a couple of exempted categories that it's not clear if that's division or student level spending. So the idea is to create a profile of what you're spending per student in a school, but you're pulling in other categories of spending into that calculation. So we will workshop you on that when we're ready to do that and show you what that looks like. But the idea there is to get a picture of our district spending more in some schools versus others, and then what hopefully that does is allow us to have a conversation about why. The answer will be yes. We will be spending more in some schools than others. There are additional federal resources, for example, that go into our Title I buildings, and so.
Right.
So there are places, and then there'll be salary differences that'll come out because, in some of our schools, we've got more new teachers than in other schools. And those are then opportunities for us to discuss, what does that mean? And I think it'll be a good dialogue for us to have.
And that'll be reflective of academies as well as Governor's School for the Arts.
All of that spending will show up.
Transportation will go into that as well?
Transportation is, I think, one of those ones that's pulled out, and
Okay.
it's not included in that category of school level spending.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other questions, I think we thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And at this point, we are not, since we're not having a closed session at this time, we are going to recess and reconvene on the dais at
What time
6
do you want to do
o'clock.
the picture?
Oh, I wanted to do the picture like right away, if that's okay with you all. So, last year we did it in the foyer.
Yeah,
So, is that good? Okay.
Yep, we're
So
good.
we'll be about 5 minutes if we can meet down there in the foyer.
You go outside.
Oh, I
Y'all
don't want to
have
go
fun with that.
outside and sweat.
I think that sounds great.